Namaskar. My name is Purnima. Today we have a special guest with us, Francois Gautier. He is an awesome person. He's actually currently living in India. He's a French journalist, is quite inquisitive about Indian civilization, have done tremendous amount of work on what Indian culture is, and I'm quite curious and as well as want to learn from him and his experience, what he has found. And today, especially speaking, we want to try to dig down into the atrocities of Mughal Empire. When you do a search in Google, you will find tremendous amount of glorification that is going on, but the truth is different. History doesn't work for anybody. History works for itself, whether you like it or not. We must know the truth of the history, not suppressing it, not hiding it. So welcome, Mr. Francois. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation and being here to be with me to connect on these quite interesting subjects. So let's directly dig into this particular topic. The reason I wanted to have a talk with you is because recently I came across with a video where a university professor, she calls herself a historian, who denied the evidences you collected. And I believe the denial is because you are not a professor, you are not from the academia, and that's probably why these evidences are not getting collected and also digged into. So I would like to talk to you. We'll start with all these atrocities with an overall idea how Mughal came to India, what was their purpose. It was not to build India, it was not to build Taj Mahal. If that was the case, if they had so much of abilities and capabilities, why didn't they build in Kabul or Uzbekistan, which is where Babur is from? So let's dig down. Tell us your experience of who Aurangzeb really is, the final powerful ruler of the Mughal dynasty, the worst of all.
Right. So actually, I studied Aurangzeb because as a journalist, I was a witness to the ethnic cleansing of the Hindus of the Valley of Kashmir. So these opened my eyes. It's true I'm not a historian, but when I witnessed, that religion could chase out people who were absolutely innocent, had done no harm, and had lived in the Valley of Kashmir for centuries, so chase them out and they became refugees in their own country. And I started studying Indian history because the inheritance of Aurangzeb is very much alive today, not only in India but in the world. Aurangzeb represented, a radical, fundamentalist, intolerant brand of Sunni Islam, the most rigid, and the most pure, you might say, brand of Islam. And today, shadow is still there. Aurangzeb visited Kashmir, and the fundamentalism of the Kashmiri Muslims is an inheritance of Aurangzeb. The fact is today Kashmiri Muslims, pose themselves as martyrs, but they started a war against the government of India, against their Hindu brothers and sisters in the name of Islam. I was there, so I haven't forgotten that. So when I saw that, I started studying Indian history, and of course, Aurangzeb is a very central figure because, as you said, he's been portrayed and is still portrayed today as a stern, firm, but benevolent emperor under whom, arts flourished, and India reached the peak of civilization. Nothing is further from the truth. Actually, Aurangzeb was a monster, not only towards Hindus, but towards his own family. He imprisoned his father Shah Jahan, and slowly had him poisoned. He imprisoned his sons, beheaded his brother Dara Shikoh, who was a rather enlightened Sufi who believed that Islam had roots in the Upanishads. So he was an absolute monster. But the funny thing about Aurangzeb that no historian tells you today is that he was a very meticulous emperor. Whatever he ordered, he had firman, what's called firman, edicts written down in Farsi, and then he would either oppose himself the emperor's seal or have one of his courtiers do it. So they're all preserved today. Whatever Aurangzeb did in his lifetime is preserved today in Indian's museum. There are two museums that housing Aurangzeb firmans. One is the Bikaner archive in Rajasthan, and the other one is the Hyderabad Aurangzeb Museum in Hyderabad, of course. So anybody who wants to study Aurangzeb, whether it is to praise him or to condemn him, can access this document. And this is what I did. I had the services of a professor of Indian history, Professor V.S. Bhatnagar. He is a retired head of the Rajasthan University Department of History, and we got permission from the then Chief Minister, Mrs. Rajesh Scindia, to access the Bikaner archive, and we scan many of Aurangzeb's firmans and translated them from Farsi to Hindi and English. And then we hired a team of painters in Jaipur and asked them to reproduce some of these firmans. So the exhibition I did on Aurangzeb, and which is today in the Museum of Indian History I have built in Pune, is based only on his edicts, only on what he ordered. There is no comment. There is no need to comment. I mean, for instance, when Aurangzeb ordered the destruction of the Krishna temple in Mathura, and the murtis to be buried below the step of the mosque that was built on the raised temple, Krishna temple, there is an order. There is an order which has got the emperor's seal. So you just need to. So our painters did that. They just reproduced about 50 of Aurangzeb firmans, and without any comment. So on one side is the firman of Aurangzeb, on the other side is a painting. So this exhibition I opened in Delhi's Habitat Center and then took it all over India. But when I tell you that Aurangzeb's shadow is still alive, when we brought it in Chennai, there was a gentleman who was, his name is the Nawab of Arcot. His great ancestor was named by Aurangzeb. He's a Muslim, of course, but he's kept a certain position because in Tamil Nadu, he's third in the hierarchy. After the governor, after the chief minister, comes the Nawab of Arcot. So anyway, we brought this exhibition in Chennai, and there was some article in newspapers which the Nawab of Arcot saw, and he came to see the exhibition. He was very offended, particularly by painting which depicted the raising of the Somnath temple. As you know, the Somnath temple was raised 7 times, one time by Aurangzeb, and we have the firman, we have Aurangzeb's order, which we placed next to the painting. But he was very offended, he started shouting, and then the next day, there was a nearby mosque in Chennai, and people from that mosque came and started shouting slogans. You know how it is in India, it's enough that 10 or 15 people shout slogans, and then there is a law and order problem. It happened that this Nawab of Arcot knew very well the son of the then chief minister, who was Mr. Karunanidhi. So he knew his son Stalin, and so he phoned Stalin, and Stalin sent one of his highest decorated officer. I forgot his name, but he's the guy who killed Veerapan, the sandalwood smuggler. So he sent him to close down the exhibition. The police threw down some of the paintings, particularly the Somnath temple painting, took the ladies into jail. I was in Delhi, then I flew to Chennai, got the ladies released. It took me 6 months to get the exhibition back. It was broken and damaged. I got it repaired in Pondicherry and then sent it to Pune. And today it is permanently exhibited in my Shivaji Maharaj Museum of Indian History. So, Aurangzeb is a monster, no doubt. Why does he hold such a fascination for people? It's a great mystery. For instance, people say that under Aurangzeb, arts flourish in India, but actually Aurangzeb was, as I said, very strict Sunni. He banned music in his court. Now, most musicians in India converted to Islam because otherwise they couldn't perform their art. So most of these musicians were Muslim, who had recently converted to Islam, Hindus who had recently converted to Islam. So what they did, because Aurangzeb banned the music, they had a mock burial of their instruments. There is some testimonies of that. So we have a painting in that exhibition which shows all these musicians, doing a mock burial of their musical instruments because they could not perform anymore. So far from being a enlightened monarch, Aurangzeb was a very dark and he was a Hitler of his time. It's very sad that today he's been made a hero, especially in the United States, by people like Audrey Truschke or Mr. Witzel, because he was particularly hard against Hindus. He reimposed the jizya tax on Hindus. In fact, when Hindus protested the jizya tax in Delhi, Aurangzeb himself and his elephants trampled upon them. There was a French doctor in the court of Aurangzeb. His name was Bernier. So Bernier was there, and when he went back to France, he wrote his memoirs, and he recounted the scene of Hindus being trampled by Aurangzeb elephants, and Aurangzeb himself on one of his elephants because they protested the jizya tax. So, great monster. And thousands and thousands of temples raised, some of them, very ancient temple, like the Somnath temple, or the Krishna Mathura temple in Mathura, and forbade Hindus to ride horses, elephants, palanquins. Generally fought, against Hindus everywhere. Luckily, there was Shivaji Maharaj. So people talk about Aurangzeb extensively, but very little about Shivaji Maharaj, who was a great warrior, extraordinary warrior, the Napoleon of India, and who stood against Aurangzeb alone. Aurangzeb was a very powerful emperor. I think his army was then the most powerful in the world. His treasury was immense. He had no problem with money. But Shivaji Maharaj stood against him, and when Shivaji Maharaj was born, the Mughal Empire was at its peak. When Shivaji Maharaj died at the young age of 52, the Mughal Empire had started to crumble and would never recover again. Now, as you know, what is called the First War of Independence, and some other people call it the Great Indian Mutiny, tried to restore the Mughal Empire by putting back onto the throne the last Mughal emperor who was in jail in Delhi. They failed, of course, and the British exiled him in Burma, where he died, impoverished and unknown. So it's important that Indian history be rewritten. I have done it in many of my books. I have tried to rewrite Indian history. In fact, I don't know where it is. Here it is. This is the latest book that I have written, an entirely new history of India, which of course has a chapter on Aurangzeb, and shows him as he really was, as a monster. But there are also many parts about him. Even Akbar was supposed to be the most enlightened of Mughal emperors, was very cruel. He killed 30,000 Hindus in Chittor. And again, there was the Hindu hero, Maharana Pratap, the only Rajput who actually fought the Mughals, because all the other Maharajas either gave their daughters in marriage to the Mughals or paid them ransom money. So Maharana Pratap was the only man who said rightfully that the Mughals were foreigners, they were invaders. In that time it was perceived like that. It is not today, but in those days it was perceived that the Mughal was invaders. They came from outside India. They were not original Indians. They were invaders. So Maharana Pratap refused to deal with Akbar. Akbar kept sending emissaries to Maharana Pratap and telling him, let us be friends, let's make an alliance, But Maharana Pratap refused, and actually Maharana Pratap fought Akbar's army in Adilgati and held him at bay, and Akbar's army had to retreat. So, the history of India is not written as it is. People who have been made heroes like Aurangzeb or even Akbar were not really heroes. people who have been swept under the carpet, or there are 3-4 lines about them, like Maharana Pratap or Shivaji Maharaj, were actually great Indian heroes. So I have tried, both in my books and in the museum I built in Pune, to show Indian history as it happened, particularly the Mughal period. So I have exhibition on Aurangzeb, of course. I have exhibition on the Hindu Holocaust, from Hindu Kush to Aurangzeb's time to 9/11 Mumbai. I have exhibition on Maharana Pratap. Also great Indian heroines like Tarabai, who fought Aurangzeb. We are making an exhibition on Tarabai in Udaipur with another professor of Indian history, K.S. Gupta, who was a specialist on that period. So we are showing that Tarabai, a queen who became queen by accident, fought the Mughals successfully and great courage. I mean, Indian women, it is not so well known because today in the West they like to portray Indian women as downtrodden, burnt, sati, raped, but actually there were so many great Indian women warriors. I mean, of course, the Rani of Jhansi is very well known, but there are so many others. Rani Kito Chennamma in Karnataka, Tarabai, Aliabai Holkar was a great queen, not of royal blood, but who actually fought the British. So many great queens. So my task has been to rewrite Indian history as much as I can and to put it in stone and artifacts in the museum I'm building in Pune.
That's fascinating. You actually touched on something that I really want to dig in. You mentioned about how Indian women were so brave and fought against the Mughals' atrocities, which is not in the history book, and Indian history is not being taught as it is. The reason I want to dig into it is because today I see, specifically on the human rights arena, there is a lot of Muslims who, quote unquote, talk about humanitarian aspect of it. But when we talk about women and feminism and human rights, there's no connection to morality or even from a humanitarian perspective with Islam.
Right.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the liberty of women in India were taken away, freedom were taken away after the invasion of Islamic caliphates. Tell us a little bit about that.
No, in India there is a Shakti element. I mean that it's a Hindu thing. It's of course, Sri Aurobindo said, "Without her, I am unmanifest. Without her, I am unmanifest." So throughout Indian history, there is a worship of the Shakti, of the feminine element. That in every man there's a feminine element, and every man needs a Shakti, whether he has a companion or not, whether he has a queen or not. He needs the Shakti. The Shakti is the energy. So, of course, there have been abusers. Of course, there are still today in some villages, abusers. But my experience living in India for so long, being married to an Indian, is that the Hindu woman is queen. The Hindu woman has had a freedom throughout Indian history that the Muslim woman never had, whether it is in India, whether it's in Saudi Arabia, whether it's in Pakistan, whether it's in Iran. Today the Muslim woman is still, prisoner of a burqa, prisoner of the man, she cannot attend a mosque, with a man. But the Hindu woman throughout Indian history has been a queen. Whether it is that half of the deities in India are feminine, whether it is the worship of Kali, of Sri Ramakrishna, of Swami Vivekananda, or whether it is, all these great women warriors. I don't know all of them, but there are so many of them. And you see in Kerala, which today is a communist state, of course, there is still matriarchy. There is still an element that, the woman is the one who inherits. In the royal family of Trivandrum, which I visited long ago, they adopt a girl who would become the next in line to be the Maharani. So this is totally, there is unfortunately, Indology, the studying of India is in the hands of a few people, whether it is in the United States, whether it's in France or Germany, who have a grudge against India, whether a grudge against Hindus, who keep belittling Hindus, who keep speaking about caste, about Hindu fundamentalism, about women being raped, but never highlight the greatness of India, both past and present. I mean, China may be the queen of the world now in the instant that its economy is doing well. They're very aggressive. They seem to be successful everywhere. But India is a democracy. It's a land, where people have freedom, where whether you're a Muslim or a Christian or a Parsi or a Jain, a Sikh or a Hindu, you have freedom of worship, which is not true in China, which is not true in Saudi Arabia, which is not even true in America. America remains a Christian country, and if you're a president, you swear on the Bible. Whether it's Mr. Obama or Mr. Trump or Mr. Biden, they all swear on the Bible. Not in India. India is a country of great tolerance, and it pains me to see that Western Indologists always highlight the negative. It pains me to see articles in New York Times, whether it is about women, whether it's about Article 370, which is absolutely unjust. It's absolutely unjust that Muslims from the Valley of Kashmir could go all over India, buy land, buy houses, start businesses, and Indians from the rest of India could not go to Kashmir. It was not just. So Mr. Modi said wrong, right, but the entire Western media went after him and said that he was persecuting Muslims, which is absolutely untrue. Muslims today, they have cornered the souvenir trade all over India, whether it's in Delhi, in Pune, in Chennai, in Pondicherry even. You see all the souvenir shops. Most of them are held by Kashmiri Muslims. Oh, and nobody says anything. I mean, I see it. In Auroville, where I go often, there is a very small village. They've never seen a Muslim in their life. Now Muslims come because there are so many Westerners. They offer bigger price to rent shops. They offer better prices. So they get the shops, they get the monopoly. Nobody complains. Nobody complains. But Indians cannot go to Kashmir and do the same. So Mr. Modi did something, just. But it was so misinterpreted by the Western media. Again, these Indologists, we keep harping, against Hindus. It's very sad because in the 30 years I've been a journalist and defending India and writing books, I don't see any change. I don't see any change in the Western attitude towards India. It may be that because of COVID-19, maybe because there'll be a backlash against China because the COVID-19 came from China. China has been very aggressive at the moment, whether it's in Hong Kong, Taiwan, Ladakh, the new Silk Road. It may be a backlash against China and then India would come up, but at the moment, I still see a lot of prejudices against India. One of them being that the Mughals were great rulers and that people like Shivaji Maharaj or Maharana Pratap or Rani of Jhansi or Tarabai are not worthy of the interest of Western Indologists.
Right. It is truly disappointing, and it hurts when America, like country, when they say they're secular country, they still have tremendous amount of grudges against Hindus. I don't get it. You're right. You mentioned about Akbar here. Akbar guy, this person had weighed 200 kg Janu to figure out how many Hindus he killed.
Yes.
That's the person, the Mughal, that they are selling as a more nicer kind of figure.
Yes.
Did they really made India richer? Because foreigners, when they come to India, they don't know anything about history of India. All they think about is Taj. They don't know it's a tomb. They don't know the way it was built out, at cost of whom at that time, what was going on in India. Even Audrey Tushke, like figures and characters, go to India and brainwash university kids.
Yes, but see, the problem also is that Indians, Hindus for that matter, go in American universities and they spit on their own culture. So Western Indologists and journalists, I see it in India with the Western correspondents in Delhi, they just say, I'm not saying that, you guys are saying it. There are so many Hindu academics in American universities who rant against Modi, against the BJP, against Hindu fundamentalism, So they give the food is already chewed for Western Indologists and journalists to spit on India. So unless you target these people, first you have to target the Hindus who spit on Hindus. That is the first people you should target. It's always been my advice is that forget about Western Indologists and journalists. They will come. They come and they go. Eventually, some others will replace them. But the problem is that Hindus themselves, and there are many intellectuals in India, we see that much of the media in India is very hostile to Hindus. They will never say anything against Islam. One, because they're afraid that their newspapers will be burned down, and two, because it is not politically correct. But anything about Hindus, they will say, and they will belittle Hindus, slander them. If many Hindus are killed, doesn't matter to them. So as a Westerner, as a non-Indian, non-Hindu, it's always shocked me. It's always shocked me. I remember when there was an American, he was Australian actually, pastor who was killed, brutally killed, and the guy is in jail for life and might have been hanged. I don't know. But there was such an uproar in India. But Hindus are killed in Kashmir. When they were killed in Kashmir, didn't seem to matter anybody. So I'm very shocked at that one-sided thing. But again, unless you target the Hindus in the United States who speak against Hindus, who speak against India, you will not achieve much, because I think most American people are good-willing towards India. Most French people, the ordinary French people, is good-willing about India. But the Indologists, the people in France who are paid by the government, they're actually subsidized by the French government to speak about India, to enlighten the French about India. And they're the guys who, whenever there is something important, an election, they're invited by television, they write in newspapers. So these people spread disinformation about India. So in turn, the ordinary people gets confused. My publishers in France, I'm writing books, and I see my editors. They said, "Oh, but India is a very dangerous country, and at the moment there's a very right-wing, dangerous government." And so because the people who are supposed to enlighten them spread disinformation. So it's a very difficult situation, actually, and I have been fighting a lone battle for so long. I see that there isn't much chance, unfortunately. I don't know in America, but I guess it's the same. But in America, the hostility of the New York Times, of CNN, of the Washington Post, of Al Jazeera is tremendous. It's tremendous, and it's backed by people who are very polished and wear a tie and wear a suit and are taken seriously by everybody. So it's a battle to be fought, and then on the other hand, you see that China, who has a very poor human rights records, not only towards the Tibetan, but towards the Chinese Muslims, towards their own people. I think Mao Zedong must have killed at least 5 million Chinese. They are worshipped. There is no ill will toward China. Newspapers will never say anything. So it's a complete contradiction, and one can only believe in karma, hope that India has a rather good karma in terms of human rights. India never invaded another country, never tried to impose its own religion by force to anybody. Hindus never, even today, Hindus don't mind other people. I mean, they welcome them, and they never try to impose their religion. So India has a good karma. So one can only hope that this good karma of Hindus will bear fruit in the near future.
That's quite interesting what you mentioned about Hindus, that actually spitting on Hindus, even in India and abroad. That's happening quite a lot. You talked about some of those media outlets, foreign media outlets sitting in India, who has writers like Rana Ayub. And these postings, these opinion pieces are not just bound to India, but we can also look at it right here in America and abroad. So concerns that I have is from the government side. When these foreign companies are in India and we have Islamists who
Yeah.
are pushing negative narrative on India and Hindus constantly, and the Indian government doesn't do
Mm.
anything, probably because they're afraid for the backlash that is going to come from the Western countries, that they're working against Muslims or so.
Mm.
What India can do at all, because India as a whole, not only Hindus have gone through tremendous amount of atrocities, but Hindus are also tolerating this kind of Islamist constant provoking behavior.
You see, I mean, India has to be a bit like China because China doesn't tolerate any crap from Western journalists, doesn't tolerate any Christian conversion, doesn't tolerate anybody talking against them, even receiving the Dharma for that matter, and most governments cave in. So there has to be a balance. India is perceived as a very soft and very weak government that you can say anything, you can do anything, there'll be no reaction. So unless India shows some firmness and says, okay, we're going to stop buying Boeing planes and we're going to buy Airbuses. That's what the Chinese do. Anything happens, they tell America, okay, we're going to buy Airbuses now. Forget about Boeings. So Americans cave in because China has economic power, but so does India. I mean, India potentially, as soon as it starts recovering from the COVID, has a tremendous economic potential for the West to invest. So, but unless India, I see, for instance, the BBC or the CNN, but BBC is more flagrant because BBC is the Britishing and the British colonized India. Uh, the BBC keeps spitting, the BBC India, I'm talking about BBC India, not BBC London. The BBC India keeps writing negative articles all the time, and the Indian government doesn't say anything. So the BBC goes on. There is no break, they think they can get away with anything. And I don't think Mr. Modi is different from Mr. Manmohan Singh in that respect. He seems to be thinking like Mr. Vajpayee thought of before him, that to be accepted by Western nations, he needs to show what is called secularism, that is tolerance and accepting everything and pretending to love everybody. But this is not the way. This is not the way. The West hates Mr. Putin, but Mr. Putin is respected by Russians because he thinks Russian. He thinks that, Russian first. And he acts tough when the Russians, interests are at stake. And this is respected by the Russians. But of course, I know that Mr. Modi done so many great things, and I was quoting Article 370 before. But in terms of international respect, India is not respected. That's all, full stop. I mean, we saw with Mr. Trump that one day he would, say something very nice about India. Next day he would say that India is a dirty country, or India doesn't allow Harley Davidson. So India needs to be respected. India needs to be act a little bit like the Chinese. First, Indian interest, and if you jeopardize Indian interest, I will act tough. But this is not happening because Hindus are what they are. The Hindus are what they are. They always forgive and they always forget.
Now, this kind of characteristics doesn't really is not really helping us in terms of tolerance. Tolerance doesn't mean one has to be pushover. It doesn't mean one can simply come and literally walk all over us. But unfortunately, as you said, rightly pointed out earlier, Hindus don't see what's happening to their motherland or their culture or their religious faith and belief, and they are spitting negative images constantly. And it's not about other people. They're not themselves standing against the propaganda either. Immediately, do you see any solution? Do you see anything that we can do immediately?
No, Hindus have to go down the streets. I mean, I'm not saying that Hindus need to blow themselves up, and blow other planes, people's planes, and blow people with planes, or slaughter people. But Hindu needs to be a little more forceful, and for that, they need to go down the streets. I have been saying for 20 years that when when an American journalist writes something very negative and very untruthful about India, it should be challenged in the street if necessary. That there should be some Hindu youth who have the, who have the courage, have the guts to go and meet this guy in the street and say, look, what you're saying is very untrue. And the guy will be careful next time, because journalists are not very courageous people, especially those who write, very with venomously, with a lot of venom. Usually they're people who are weak and cowardly, but it's not happening. So again, these journalists think that they can get away with any slander, and they go on slandering India. But unless they're challenged physically, I'm not saying, beat them up or kill them. I'm saying, meet them physically in the street. Nothing will happen. Nothing will happen. I've done so many webinars. I mean, now we're doing online, but I've given so many talks. Okay, it's good, but in the end, it makes no difference unless Hindus take things in their own hands. And for that, I think the youth can play a great role. But unfortunately, whenever I give talks in American universities, I remember giving a talk in Atlanta, the last one I gave 2-3 years ago in Atlanta University, where there were at least 3,000 Indian students. I gave a talk on rewriting Indian history. Out of 3,000 Indian students, 9 turned up for my talk. I mean, it's not that I do it free, so I don't do it for money, but it saddened me to see how uninterested the Indian youth that goes abroad are about their own country. It's just about America and studying and partying and drinking, and melting in the great American melting pot. But not about Indianness, not about I'm Indian after all. I have to keep some Indianness. So I'm I'm a little cynical about that, because I don't see much chance. The Chinese are very proud to be Chinese. Chinese Americans went back to China, reinvested their money into China, are proud to be Chinese. But that's not the way with Indian Americans. They're just interested in putting their children in the best schools, in making money, a little bit of Diwali, a little bit of some cultural rubbish, but not about the core of Indianness. What is it to be an Indian? What is it to be an Indian? What is that knowledge that means to be a Hindu? What is that knowledge that the Hindu hold, the last knowledge in the world? They're totally disinterested. So I'm not very optimistic, to tell you the truth.
I totally get it, and I totally understand where you're coming from. But how can we even blame them? Look at our country, what happened for the last 70 years. Implementation of a constitution which is not really Indian constitution, which was ruled by dynasty, Socialist Party, and Indian Communist Party. And the whole education system is all about English. I don't come from English background. I didn't even study in English medium. The first entire course I studied in English was in my college. Taking that from a context of higher studies, you can't do higher studies without English. But was my, up to 12th grade, everything was completely on a local language. The context coming from what a poor person in India really want is their kids to be well educated and settled and have a good job. If they go to America or France or Germany or England, they may be well settled. That's all they care about. Good engineers, lawyers, and doctors. But you are absolutely right. Hindus are not taught about our culture, our history, and heritage. At the same time, though, the other communities are, whether it's Islamic communities or so, they know about their culture. They know about who they are, who their masters are, and what their orders, when they're given orders, what they need to take and run. We Hindus are not taught like that. That's why we are accepting.
Yeah, you're right. The Indian mind is still colonized. The tragedy, of course, is that Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, chose to take over whatever the British had left, including the education system. So today, Indian kids are not taught about the greatest of their country, the heroes, heroines, the great poets like Kalidasa, the great philosophers like Sri Aurobindo, the great warriors like Shivaji Maharaj, Maharaj. They're taught about, mostly English through the English prism. So as a result, they're only good for export. They're only good for export because they have no roots in their own greatness, in their own history. Forget about the dark side of history, which has been swept under the carpet by Nehru and Marxist historians, but they have no root, they have no pride in being Indians. So that's a great tragedy. So unless the Indian education system is changed, there's a new curriculum that teaches from kindergarten to be proud to be an Indian, we will see that this greatest brain drain in the world still continues, and it still does. But it's not the villagers who send their kids to American universities. It's mostly the middle class, upper middle class, and upper class who do. The villagers, the core of India, the genius of India is still in the hands of the 75% rural India, not in Delhi, not in Bombay, not in, maybe in Calcutta, I don't know, but certainly not in Delhi and in Bombay. So, unless the education system is changed, I don't see much hope. And even Mr. Modi has not been able to do much about changing that curriculum. There has been some fringe efforts, and there is still now at the moment some fringe effort, but there will be a great resistance and a great outcry if, if in school books Shivaji Maharaj, Maharana Pratap, Rani of Jhansi are introduced, people will talk about communalism, about Hindu saffronism. So the more we wait, the more it's going to be difficult. Okay.
Yes. So 2 days ago, in the conversation with IRF Roundtable, they have brought out two major issues. Number one, the UP's anti-conversion marriage law, and the second one was the farmers' protest. So America, USCIRF, which is the United States Council on International Religious Freedom, these guys are really working on making sure India is labeled as CPC, country of particular concern. And they're also, yes, so why is because they're saying that all these issues that they're coming up and they're quite concerned about, that this is against particular community. How is a farmers protest is against particular community? Right? And how is the anti-conversion law, the anti-conversion marriage law is against somebody's falling in love with somebody? They're saying that they literally the discussion went along to portray India to be against this community of Islam.
Muslims still have credit today, but they're going to get more and more discredited, and their voices are going to be to carry less and less weight as time goes, because Islam is fighting a war against the entire world with the silent support of most of the Muslims in the world. So ultimately, they cannot win that war. I don't see that Islam can win that war. And that it's fighting in England, fighting in France, fighting in Chechnya, fighting in Kashmir. At some point, the world is going to say enough, and the world is going to unite, including the Chinese, because after all, whatever the fault of the Chinese, they are part of the civilized world. So Islam cannot win that war, and all these Muslim intellectuals like the Rana Ayub, will lose credit slowly. They will lose credit, and they will not be able to discredit Hindus like they do now. So, yeah, there is hope. We should remain positive, and there is hope. And there's always been a divine grace on India. India has always been in difficult situations and always come out. So we do hope that Swami Vivekananda and Sri Aurobindo and all the great saints that have come to India and said that one day India will become the spiritual leader of the world are right.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for being here and accepting my invitation to be here and giving us a tremendous amount of inputs. Look forward to actually read your book. I think you do a fantastic job researching. We'll dig down later on the Mughal dynasty and their atrocities, and this conversation continues. Thank you, Francois ji. Thank you so much.
Thank you.